Hi, everyone. I am Sam Osterhout with Lincoln Square, and every week we do a check-in with Andrew Watkins. We 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 try to see what's going on from the white Christian nationalist world, and usually, if it weren't for Andrea, it would be the worst part of our week because the stories she has for us are jarring. Fortunately, Andra is one of the best people I know and a wonderful person. And we
It's
really
very
rely.
kind of you to say.
It's true. It what should be the worst part of my week is actually the best part of my week. Let's check in with Andra today.
You and Lisa both say that, and I mean, I just love hanging out with y'all too. So it's great to be
Well,
here.
it's mutual. Andra does the Substack for such a time as this, which is really an essential read. And but she's been sounding the alarm on Project 2025 for years.
Over a year. I started last January 2024.
Is that
writing
right?
about it
That
as
it
a
feels
white Christian christo-fascist manifesto. Yeah,
it feels like a century that this has been happening.
it does, doesn't it?
It does. Well, so this week, Andrew reached out to us to talk about. She wanted to talk about a thing that's been popping up for her and causing a lot of stress. And when I started reading into it last night, I understood exactly what she was talking about. But I also, Andra, I grew up as a Methodist, which was sort of community first and religion maybe down like the. I didn't learn dogma. The most what I've learned was the many ways to prepare a potato. Hot dish, tots. So I just want to set the table here a little bit. You're really focused on this thing called Project Esther this week.
Well, that was broken this week, I think, by the New York Times. Multiple outlets have written about it. So in a nutshell, what Project Esther is being presented as is a means of labeling Gaza protesters or Palestinian protesters terrorists or anti-Semitic based on their protest speech and activity and protecting Israel at all cost. If you don't know who Esther was,
that was my next question.
Such a time, for such a time as this is an homage to her. The title of my Substack is an homage to her. So Esther was a very famous in Jewish history. She's one of the most seminal people. The Feast of Purim every year is in honor of her actions and her story. So she was a concubine of a Persian king when the Israelites were in captivity, one of the times that they were in captivity. And his most beautiful wife offended him by not coming when he ordered her to come somewhere. So he cast her out and had a beauty pageant of all the women in the kingdom to pick his next most beautiful wife. And so this concubine, Esther, who was a Jewess, who was an Israelite, but nobody knew it, won the beauty contest, and he made her his most favored queen. He also had this advisor who hated the Jews, and on a certain day got the king to sign a decree that all the Jews would be executed in the kingdom. So Esther went to her husband unsummoned. You could not in that court go to the king without him summoning you, or you could be executed. He had to hold out a scepter to admit you. So she got herself all gussied up and went to see him unsummoned, and he was so taken with her beauty or whatever that he held out the scepter and let her come into his presence. And so she invited him to a dinner where she told him that she was Jewish, that he had signed a decree that she was going to be executed because of his advisor. So he amended it because decrees could not be changed, or it could not be revoked once the king signed them. He amended it to say the Jews could fight back. So because of her bravery and in risking her life to go before her husband to plead for her people, they were saved from genocide. So the Feast of Purim every year celebrates that in the Jewish faith. As a white Christian nationalist child, she was my favorite. I mean, she's still my favorite Bible character because,
you amazing. She's
you
like
want to see
for everything.
Yeah, I mean, And as a girl, there aren't a whole lot of women in the Bible to be like, oh, wow, I'd like to be like her. Women are usually presented as awful people in the
Right.
Bible. So she
A
was
sort of
amazing.
a sort of filth that you need to isolate,
Yes.
clean off. Well, that was my next question, because I wondered if you grew up with this story, and you did clearly, but was it a story of female empowerment as told by your community?
No. In white Christian nationalism, her uncle Mordecai played the key role in convincing her, taking her aside and telling her, who knows whether you didn't come to the kingdom for such a time as this, and God is going to use you, and you need to risk your life, and blah, blah. So really, it was because Mordecai convinced her to do it. But I always have seen it as, wow, what a badass she was, that she actually risked her
Yeah.
life for her entire nation.
Yeah.
So as a girl, I identified with her bravery and her fierceness. But, of course, the emphasis was always on his having to convince her to do it in my upbringing.
Which I guess you could understand, that
Yeah,
you couldn't have a woman take the lead role. You have to spin it so that the man is always the hero.
exactly. So that's a background on Esther. And if you've heard of Project Esther, that's where the name comes from. And it incenses me, as I said
Well,
yesterday, that they would take a strong woman who saved her people from genocide and turn her into a figurehead for suppression of speech and labeling your enemies terrorists and etc. That it
well,
incenses me that they would do that to her.
Yeah. I mean, there's no bottom, there's no basement, there's this is an endless pit of awfulness, clearly. But let's go back to Project Esther, because I'm not connect the dots here. What is Project Esther? Who's behind it? And what's happening?
So Project Esther is an initiative by the Heritage Foundation, which also coordinated and sponsored Project 2025. So they are billing Project Esther as an initiative to root out anti-Semitism in America. And anyone who advocates for Gaza or Palestinians, they are going after and labeling anti-Semitic. And they're actually applying a lot of the laws that were passed in the wake of 9/11 to focus on true terrorist activity, to try to see if they can get away with saying we still have a First Amendment, but also
Right.
you're a terrorist because you're saying things that we disagree with. So this group of people is a test case to see how much of that they can accomplish. But
So
Project Esther has a much bigger goal of labeling anyone who disagrees with the regime a terrorist.
and I think that's what I'm hearing. The news this week has, every week, every day, every minute is flooded. There's habeas corpus and its various definitions, and there's this budget that is patently immoral. There's all of this, but this is something that's sliding. It's just sliding under. And it's why I was so interested in it when you reached out, because this is the thing that solidifies power. It calcifies their reign, because it's you start picking on the least of us in order to control the rest of us,
everyone.
And it feels like that's this slippery slope. It's not about Palestine.
Oh, no, absolutely not. And, as I wrote about yesterday on my Substack, and have written a lot about white Christian nationalists' end times apocalyptic beliefs. And now everybody's head's going to explode, and people are going to say Andrea is the most hysterical, crazy person we've ever heard talk. And, as you said in the green room beforehand, it's like, if you didn't grow up in this, or you've not been exposed to it in your life, it really does sound just absolutely batshit crazy. So I get that reaction from people.
Well, I mean, I think the power, that power grab part of it, the ability, the like, oh, they're dangerous people. We need to protect, Jewish people in the United States and abroad, and they're under attack. And it feels like an easy, it's an easy, authoritarians look for easy targets first.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that's the piece that's going to resonate. But because you're right, there are a lot of pieces of this that just feel like a fantasy world, or like a really, like a Marvel series that's jumped the shark. It's
Well, I mean, when I was growing up, there was a series of books that are probably still in print that were drawn from this last days. And they were written like dystopian fiction, but everybody in white Christian nationalism read them and talked about how it was really fact and it was going to happen and all of that. But that's a lot of what's driving their focus on Israel in multiple aspects of this administration.
yes.
And the goal of Project Esther, in part, is to make sure that the nation of Israel exists, and that it exists as it did according to their ancient maps of the biblical tribes of Israel. Because in their view of biblical prophecies, we are living in the end times of the earth. I've heard that my entire life. I started hearing that when I was a child. And there are two different schools of thought about what that means. So I grew up in the apocalyptic, there's going to be an actual antichrist. He's going to rule the whole earth. We're going to have a literal 7-year tribulation period. The antichrist will rule from Jerusalem. He will rebuild the temple where the Dome of the Rock and the mosque is now, and it'll be the final temple. There will be a final battle on earth after 7 years in the Valley of Megiddo outside of Jerusalem. It will be called Armageddon. And I'm sure most people have heard, I mean, they made a movie called Armageddon. So, it's that apocalyptic thing. And then at the end of that, Jesus will come back to earth to reign for 1,000 years. He'll cast the Antichrist into hell and punish everybody. And the true believers will reign with him on a new earth for 1,000 years. So that was how I grew up. And they believe the clock on that started when Israel was reformed as a nation in 1948. And that everyone, there'll be somebody alive who saw that happen when Jesus comes back, that this generation will not pass before Jesus comes back. But there's also the dominionist crowd who believes that they have to force everyone to be Christians, be dominionists, to make the earth perfect enough for Jesus to come back to. And that is their version of the end times. And they believe that they're running out of time to force everyone to be good enough.
Well, what does a perfect world look like
for
a dominionist?
Everyone's a dominionist.
When there was a story with Pete Hegseth, inviting people to a prayer circle and all of this. Hegseth is a true believer. Is that right?
Yes. And he practices in the dominionist faction of Christian nationalism. So, I mean, there are 3 factions, and we may have talked about this before. There's the Baptist Protestant, there's Presbyterians, there's a bunch of different Protestants in that mix that really adhere more to the apocalyptic end times version of what I said. There are the Dominionists who started in the 90s, who essentially came out of the charismatic Pentecostal wing of Christianity. And then there are the Opus Dei and other fringe Catholic groups, which is J.D. Vance, which is Clarence Thomas, which is Sam Alito, those kinds of people. Kevin Roberts, who was the president of the Heritage Foundation, is affiliated with them. So they all think the other groups are going to hell and aren't real Christians, but they've worked together for all this time to accomplish this goal of creating a Christian nation. Then they'll have to fight about which version of it they're going to force everybody to do. But right now, they're just seeing what they can get people to go along with and what they can get away with and what they can erode. So the Pete Hegseth prayer breakfast thing,
Yes.
and I'm going to talk about this more on another Substack today and give a more personal story on that. But
And as a side note,
everybody,
we're taping today
yeah,
at Friday at 10. So by the time
yeah,
you hear this out there, she will already
it'll
have
be
done
out
her
there.
live.
You'll be able
So
to find it.
go to For Such a Time as This and watch it. That's my plug.
So it, we probably have a lot of people at Lincoln Square who maybe work at the DOD or in the federal government. I know I have a number of people who have connections to or actually work in the federal government following my Substack. So what I want people to understand about this is somebody who grew up in Christian nationalism, who's indoctrinated in it, who understands their tactics, who was damaged by those tactics, who knows how to interpret what they do and what they're going to do. This prayer service that's been presented as optional is not optional.
Right.
And that's the first thing you need to understand. This is a means of seeing who will opt in.
It's a sorting.
And who will believe that it's optional and opt out. And in the next round of firings, because now we have someone who's the head of Doge and the head of the OMB, who is a fanatical, lunatic Christian nationalist who only believes that Christian nationalists should be politicians and only believes Christian nationalists should work in the government and only Christian nationalist men, only white men. So he believes that radically and fervently. And so,
and that's Ross Vote, right?
Russ Vote.
Russ, right.
And I mean, I have to hand it to him because he's very intelligent. He's very strategic. He knows how to operate. He's very effective.
Yeah.
And so, this prayer service is a way to see who they're going to fire in the next round of firings. And they won't tell you when they fire you that that's why you were fired. But thinking an optional prayer service was optional will be a reason to get rid of you.
Right.
So the first thing that people need to understand is it's not optional. The second thing people need to understand is once they identify who those people are, having grown up in Christian nationalism, you're never good enough. There's never not going to be another line that they're going to present to you that you're going to have to cross to prove that you're really good enough, that you really are a true believer, that you really buy in. So once they purge, then it will be, this is mandatory.
Right.
Then it will be, we've seen some people on their phones during this prayer service, and we need people to pay attention. This is the most important thing we do every day. So we're going to make you leave your phones outside. Then it's going to be, we're going to have one of these a week because they're so great and so effective, and they're all going to be mandatory. Then it's going to be, we really encourage you to form accountability groups with a few of your colleagues and come in every morning early and get together and read the Bible and pray together and talk about how things are going and who's maybe a problem vis-a-vis Christian nationalism at work. And these are all things that were done to me as a Christian nationalist in a church and school. So this is not like crazy talk. Then it will be something like, Brad, I called you into the office today because I noticed that your wife is posting these things on social media that are really just godless and heretical and against God. And, we've talked a lot in here about the roles of men and women in a godly society. And you need to go home and you need to get control of your wife and make her stop posting these things online, or there are going to be problems. And they won't do that all at once. But those are lines that I can imagine coming from this optional prayer service at the DOD.
Well, and here's the thing. I mean, there's all of that is believable because it's happened. There's been a crawl to where we are at this very moment, right? And and in some cases, it's been a sprint to where we are at this very moment. I think that connection between that belief and them believing this is in duty or service to bring about Armageddon is that leap that just feels so bananas. And I wonder.
But, you know, go ahead.
I was going to say, I believe it. I know that this is absolutely true, but I think that that's, in some ways, I feel like, are they counting on this belief being so outside of the mainstream that they can do whatever they want? Because, or is
Yes.
this, or do they not even care?
Yes. Look at how many people don't believe anything is wrong now. Look
Right.
at how many people. I mean, it's so, yes, they're totally counting on the fact that people will look at me and 9 times out of 10, when I talk about this, go, she is a lunatic. Nobody believes that.
Right.
You know, I don't know anybody who believes that. That's crazy talk. So, you know, I show up here and do my crazy talk every time y'all give me a chance to try to convince more people that there really are people who believe this stuff fervently. I mean, Israel has to exist in a Christian nationalist mind for their Bibles to come true and their end of the world prophecies, whatever they believe, to come true. And so, to give you an example of how that worked in the last administration, Republican administration, Mike Pence and Mike Pompeo are 2 Christian nationalists who fervently believe we are living in the last days of the earth. They fervently believe that all of these prophecies are going to come true imminently. So when they made the decision and convinced the president to move our embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, it was because the Antichrist, according to them, is supposed to rule from Jerusalem. And that's going to be the capital of the earth. And we are living in the end times, so we need to pave the way for that by acknowledging that that's coming and go on and move our embassy to Jerusalem. That's why they did that.
I mean, and that was, you know, that was reported on, but I think reporters don't want to wade into this, but they really ought to. And I think there's a couple of reasons. And one is it's batshit crazy and we need to stop it. Like, that's number one. But number two, it really doesn't matter if they believe that Armageddon is coming. This is bad policy. It is policy that affects the globe. It affects everyone.
Exactly. But, you know, if you don't know about what the tribulation period is and what they believe about the end of the world, let me give you a little preview. Wars and rumors of wars. Nation will rise against nation. Famines, pestilences, fires, earthquakes, weather events, carnage, bloodshed, horrors, suffering, death. So what are they orchestrating?
Right. And everything, all of those things, RFK Jr., it starts to block into place and you start to see it. And I understand, you know, being able to see the rationale behind all of this is important to get ahead of it. And just as another side note, I can see also somebody like Netanyahu thinking like, oh yeah, sure, whatever you want to believe, it helps me maintain power. Like
exactly. He's a useful tool. And Mike Huckabee is like the apex character of who believes this stuff.
Right.
And so they make him the ambassador to Israel. And his sole aim in life is to make Armageddon happen, or whatever and he's Baptist, so I'm sure that's what he believes is going to happen. You know, so his entire foreign policy approach in dealing with Israel is going to be to steer things to mirror what he thinks is going to happen in the end times. That is his sole goal in life, in that position. So putting him in that position was just horrible when I saw that, because that is all he is going to focus on.
Yeah.
And Netanyahu is a useful tool for that, because Netanyahu's goal is, I want to have all this land that we were given. It's our land according to our God, blah, blah, blah. You know, and so their goals align. Yep. Rebuilding a temple is, I mean, there's already a Jewish group that's raising money to rebuild a temple. And in 2018, Pete Hegseth spoke to that group.
Oh my God.
And said, you know, I'm really happy to be here and we need to make this happen. And rebuilding the temple is one of the, it's the end times, it's coming, it's happening. This is, it's from the book of Daniel. And so, they're actively trying to make these things happen and participating in them. And then when they start happening, when things melt down, when things get really bad, they already have this millions of indoctrinated Americans. And I mean, when I was on Facebook, I'd see them. We had the money shortage. Remember when we had the change shortage back during the pandemic, and there was no change, and it was all this conspiracy. And I was still on Facebook, and they were all going, it's one world currency. The Antichrist is supposed to usher in one world currency and one world money, which is another, and so look at this coin shortage. The Bible's coming true. It's happening. Oh my God. And so, there are all these people who every time something happens, they've been indoctrinated to say, well, COVID was part of the end times because pestilence.
Yeah.
Fires aren't climate change. Fires are they're part of the end times because these disasters were predicted. So, and people who can't think critically but weren't brought up in that will probably be sucked into that to some degree. We've seen the power of conspiracy theories for certain parts of the populace.
And I think that this is the point I was really trying to make, was that if you're living in a fantasy land, because audience, Lincoln Square people, everyone watching this right now, Armageddon's not happening in the way that they think it's going to happen. It is a dream that they came up with, and what it does, it puts a massive obstacle in the path of solving big problems like climate change. It puts our vulnerable people at risk because they're not good enough. It puts all of us at risk because we might have other opinions. This is the real nuts and bolts of this, I think, and why people really, really need to pay attention.
And call it out.
And call it out.
And you mentioned how journalists don't call out religious extremism. And, we've just been conditioned in American society not to do that. It's rude. It's not tolerant. And, especially on the left, you're supposed to be tolerant of other people. And I agree with that. Sure. I don't have a problem at all with the people who want to believe that we're living in the end of the world and practice Christian nationalism. Part of, I think, what we've forgotten about democracy is everybody has a right to be whatever your definition of an asshole is. And they have a right to believe things that offend you.
Yes.
And they have a right to be assholes. And that's just part of living in a democracy. We can't force people to stop being assholes. But, Christian nationalists have defined everyone who isn't a Christian nationalist as an asshole. And they're determined to force everyone to be a Christian nationalist. And that's really their goal. And they believe by taking control of everything. When I was growing up, my pastor he preached about this all the time. The imagery and the storytelling capacity of this eschatology from the Bible is very vivid.
Sure.
Very Lord of the Rings-ish. It draws you in. It sticks with you. And so, he constantly said that the United States didn't exist in the Bible in the last days. So, because it wasn't mentioned, there are all these different land masses that are mentioned that he would equate to present day nations. But the United States did not exist. So the United States had to fall for the Antichrist to rise. So, when I was still talking to my Christian nationalist mother, she called one day and just started with, "I'm so sorry that your life is going to be so horrible, Andrea, because we're living in the last days and things are just going to get so much worse. America has to fall for the Antichrist to come, and that's just going to be so hard for you. And I'm 85 and I'm going to be in heaven. I'm just going to have to pray that you won't be too miserable." And she had like joy in her voice.
Yeah, that's the gut punch. That's the real gut punch, is that it's not just a belief that suffering is going to happen. It's a craving. that it does.
Yes, and I told people in advance of the election, if they're successful with this, the more suffering that happens, the more the measles and bird flu and other things are unleashed on society, the more people get sick and die, the more climate disasters that happen, the more they're going to be going, hallelujah, praise God, Jesus is coming. This is the greatest thing ever.
Yeah.
They're not going to be horrified by it.
No.
So it's for people who have never been around people like that, that's going to be very jarring to watch happen too.
Yeah. I mean, it's a bit like, saying, oh, the world is going to end. And then somebody says, that's not going to happen. And they're like, hold on, I'll make sure that it does. And that's the most terrifying part is all of this is just because this is what they want.
This is what they are convinced their Bibles say is going to happen at the end of the world. And this isn't the first time people have read those prophecies and tried to say they were living in the end of the world. This is just the latest iteration of it.
I want to close out with to try to scratch out some hope from all of this, if possible. I think that your Substack gives me hope. And I mean that, even though the writing is stark and it is the stories, that is, I feel armed after I read it. I feel more prepared. What can the rest of us do to hit the brakes on this Armageddon? And is it an electoral situation? Is it just opening our eyes? Is it paying attention?
If I could wave a magic wand and make Americans galvanize and do anything right now, it would be rising up against a simple thing like a optional prayer meeting in a government building.
Wow.
It would be right, and reacting to those things seems so over the top. But, you look at how much they were able to erode to finally get Dobbs to happen, and how long women were saying, we're at risk. We need to do more to protect our right to bodily autonomy. They're coming for our right to an abortion. And so many of the women who were saying that were labeled crazy and hysterical and harpies and ridiculous and overreacting and all of that. But these people have learned how, okay, if we start here, most Americans will ignore it. And the ones who don't, we can gaslight and get everybody else to call them hysterical and insane.
Right.
And ignore them. And then we'll put this in place. And a few more Americans might go, oh no, this is terrible, but most of the rest of them won't care. And so that's how they've done everything for 50 years.
Yeah.
So you can't wait for them to get to the point where you've lost things. You have to start when they're introducing something that looks benign.
Yes.
But has an end goal of forcing everyone to believe a certain way and do a certain thing. And so if I could wave a magic wand, that's what I'd do right now. I mean, I'd have millions and millions of Americans in the streets protesting something like this prayer service that's optional.
I think, last week, I was inspired by your interview with Lisa last week on Mike Lee and that bill. And I wrote about it for Monday for my winners and losers.
I read it.
Oh yeah, he's a loser.
Yeah.
But the winner of that on the winner side was AOC because she said this one thing to someone. She said, "I will not yield to disrespectful men," and that's that's a whole other story. But it was so gripping to me because what she said was no. She said, "No, I'm not going along with this." And I think that there's real power in establishing your own values and not going beyond those values. And it with a, like you said, the first step to fighting this is to say, no, I'm not going to go to your prayer meeting. That's not going to happen. That's
well,
not what
I mean, but we've already shown if they get enough pushback on some of these things, they retract them. And
Yeah.
my goal with it, there would be enough pushback that he would go, okay, we can't do that yet. We're not ready to do that yet.
Yeah.
That's, but it would need to be a lot of pushback.
Yeah.
And so that's why I said earlier to anybody who's here who works in the government, when you see that kind of stuff happening, you need a massive pushback immediately.
Yeah.
And don't sit and think, oh, well, we're just overreacting because this is just an optional little thing that a few people are going to do, because that's not the intent of it at all.
No, it always starts with you. It starts with your own personal decisions, and then those, you live by your values. And I think I tell my daughters that you live by your values, and that reverberates into the world. And I think that's why Lincoln Square is here. That's why you do what you do. This is our, sometimes feels like a drop in the bucket, but it's a pushback.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, Andra, I really appreciate you joining today. I feel a little more hope. I feel kind of empowered. Well,
like you said, letting people know, more people know this, and get a few more people on board is important. And that does give us more hope.
And everyone, you got to subscribe to For Such a Time as This. Really, it's an essential read. And go back and watch Andra's live from Friday, which hasn't happened yet, but will have happened when you see this.
Okay.
All right. Thank you, Andra.
Thank you.